I didn't think much of it at first. Offices, doors, meetings, I've been through plenty. But the way she turned the key that morning, the way the sound echoed in the small room, it lodged itself in my head. I walked into her office, and she locked the door behind me. I work in a repair shop, a family-owned one that smells of oil and warm metal, where the phone always rings louder than it should. She isn't family, not by blood. She's the owner's sister, the one who comes in once or twice a week to handle paperwork. Invoices, the kind of numbers I always forget. I'd seen her before, in passing, but never this close. Never in a room where silence felt bigger than the space itself. Her name is Marianne. Mid-40s, maybe. She carries herself like she knows the weight of the room will shift depending on whether she sits or stands. The first thing you notice isn't her face, though it's sharp and calm, or her hair that falls loose in deliberate waves. It's the steadiness. She moves like someone who has learned patience the hard way. "Close the door," she said. Then, without waiting, she did it herself, lock clicking into place. Not threatening, not exactly. More practical, maybe, but the sound stayed with me. I stood by the desk, shifting my weight, suddenly aware of my own hands. There were papers everywhere, stacks of receipts, a mug with lipstick smudged along the rim. She gestured toward the chair across from hers, and I sat down too fast, the legs scraping the floor. "You've been here 3 months?" she asked. "4," I said, then corrected myself. "Almost 4." She glanced up from the papers. Just a flick of her eyes, but it pinned me there. I'm not sure why. It wasn't sharp or cold, just searching, like she was measuring how much of me I meant. The air conditioner rattled. Somewhere outside, someone dropped a tool. The clang rang out, then faded, leaving us in a silence that stretched too long. I wanted to fill it, to say something, anything, but my mouth stayed dry. She tapped a finger against the desk, almost absent-mindedly, and leaned back in her chair. "You're younger than most who last here." I let out a short laugh, too quick. That a compliment? Her lips curved, not a smile exactly, more like she'd heard something that didn't surprise her. Observation. Another silence. Another flicker of something unspoken. I noticed her nails then, neat, painted in a shade that wasn't loud, but still deliberate. A ring on her right hand, silver, slightly worn. Not a wedding band. Details that stuck, for no reason I could explain. She handed me a folder finally. "Invoices. You'll take these to the front." I reached out, and for a second, her fingers brushed mine. Light, nothing intentional. But I froze anyway, the contact sparking more than it should have. She didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge it, just continued as though nothing had happened. I left the room with the folder pressed too tightly under my arm. The door unlocked with another click, this one softer, though I still heard it long after I walked back into the hum of the shop. All day, I kept thinking about it. Not the paperwork, not even her words. Just the sound of that lock sliding shut, and the way she looked at me in the quiet that followed. The second time it happened, there wasn't a locked door. Just the two of us, cornered by necessity. The printer had jammed again, an ancient beast that only Marianne seemed to tolerate. She was already there when I walked into the office, sleeves rolled up, one hand buried inside the machine, like she was coaxing it back to life. "Don't just stand there," she said, not looking up. Her tone wasn't sharp, more weary, like she'd already fought this battle 100 times. I stepped closer. The smell of toner, faintly metallic, clung to the air. She cursed under her breath when a sheet tore mid-pull, leaving a jagged edge stuck inside. "Here," I offered, crouching beside her. My shoulder brushed against hers. She stiffened almost imperceptibly, then shifted just enough to give me space. It should have been nothing, paper and gears and the whir of a tired machine. But being that close, I noticed the details I shouldn't have. The faint tremor in her hand as she tugged the jammed sheet, the pale line of an old scar crossing her knuckle, the way her perfume didn't announce itself but lingered softly, like something meant to be discovered only up close. "You're good with your hands," she muttered, as I slid the torn sheet free. I looked up, half smiling, but her eyes darted away immediately, back to the stubborn printer. She hadn't meant it the way it sounded. Or maybe she had, but regretted it as soon as it left her mouth. Silence again. Except this time, I caught the smallest crack in her armor. Her breathing, slower, steadier than mine, but deeper now, like she was holding something back. You don't have to stay late for this, I said. I know, she replied. Too fast, then softer. I just prefer to finish things myself. There was weight in that. More than just paperwork. The printer groaned back to life, spitting out a fresh page like it was mocking us. She let out a small laugh, short and tired, but real. The sound pulled at me in a way I didn't expect. Not joy exactly, but release. Like she'd forgotten, for a second, to keep her guard up. I caught myself staring at the faint lines beneath her eyes, the kind that spoke of long nights and too many responsibilities. At her lips pressed together after the laugh faded, as if she regretted showing even that much. She noticed. I know she did, because she turned abruptly, gathering the printed pages with hands that suddenly moved too quickly. Take these to the front, she said. Almost the same words as last time. I reached for the stack, fingers brushing hers again. A repeat of the first spark, but this time, neither of us pulled away right away. Her grip lingered on the paper just a moment too long, like she wasn't ready to let go. When she finally did, I carried the pages out, my pulse running faster than it should. And behind me, I swore I heard her exhale, a soft, unguarded sound she hadn't meant me to catch. It was late enough that the shop had gone quiet, the kind of silence that makes you too aware of your own footsteps. Everyone else had gone home. I stayed behind to finish sorting parts in the back, but when I walked past the office, her light was still on. Marianne sat at the desk, glasses perched low, the lamplight washing her in a softer glow than the buzzing fluorescence ever allowed. Papers surrounded her like barricades. I don't know why I stopped at the doorway, but I did. You should head home, I said. My voice felt too loud in the stillness. She looked up, weary but steady. So should you. I leaned on the frame, awkward, half ready to leave but unwilling to. Need help? For once, she didn't dismiss it. She sighed, pushed the papers toward me. Fine. Matched these invoices with the receipts. We worked side by side, the lamplight throwing long shadows across the desk. The storm outside tapped against the windows, a steady rhythm like a reminder we weren't supposed to be here this late. At one point, she took off her glasses, rubbed her temples, and let out a breath that was almost a groan. Something raw slipped out in that sound. Exhaustion, maybe more. Tough day? I asked quietly. Every day's tough. She caught herself, then shook her head as though she wished the words back. Ignore me. Just tired. But I couldn't ignore it. The vulnerability hung between us, delicate, like if I reached for it I might ruin it. I wanted to ask more, but before I could, her phone lit up on the desk. A man's name. She turned it face down, a little too fast. Her jaw tightened. You can answer, I said. No, she replied, curt. Then softer, with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Not worth the trouble. The moment stretched. Her hand hovered over the phone, fingers tapping once against the case before she pulled it away entirely, as if the act of not answering was louder than any conversation. We went back to the papers, but my attention wasn't on the receipts. It was on the way her hair fell forward as she bent over the desk, the way her arm brushed mine when we both reached for the same page, the way she didn't move it right away. I could feel my heart pressing harder, urging me towards something I couldn't let happen. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She noticed me watching. I know she did, because her lips parted like she might say something. Instead, she glanced at the clock and pushed the stack of papers away. We're done. That's enough for tonight. I nodded, too quickly, stood up before the weight of what almost passed between us caught me completely. She stood too, close enough that the air between us felt too warm, too charged. For a second, I thought she might close that space. Or maybe it was me. But then the storm cracked outside, thunder breaking the fragile silence, and she stepped back, creating the distance neither of us had the courage to bridge. See you tomorrow, she said, voice level again. I walked out into the rain with one thought repeating itself. If the storm hadn't broken, what would have? The shop was empty again, but this time it wasn't an accident. She'd asked me to stay. Just a quiet, casual request. Help me with inventory. but it carried too much weight to feel casual at all. We worked in near silence, marking numbers, moving boxes. The air was thick with everything unsaid. At one point, I caught her watching me. Not by accident, not a passing glance. Her gaze lingered, heavy, until I couldn't pretend not to feel it. I froze halfway through writing down a part number, my pen suspended over the page. "What?" I asked, barely above a whisper. She didn't answer at first, just kept looking, as if she were measuring me against something invisible. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, rougher than I'd ever heard it. "What are we doing?" The question stopped me cold. Not playful, not rhetorical. It was a wound, laid open. I swallowed hard. "I don't know." Her eyes didn't move. The silence that followed pressed against us like another body in the room. She set down her pen, folded her arms tightly, a shield. "This isn't," she trailed off, shook her head. "It can't." The words dissolved, and in their place, a silence that cut deeper than anything she could have said. I wanted to answer, but my chest felt locked. My hands tightened against the edge of the desk instead. All I could do was watch her. The way her throat moved when she swallowed. The way her eyes flickered with something between anger and fear. "Finally," I said, "you're the one who locked the door, that first time." She let out a sharp breath. Not laughter, not quite anger. More like something had landed too close to the truth. "And you're the one who keeps coming back." The words landed between us like a confession neither of us had meant to make. We stood there, across from each other, an arm's length apart, but with no safe place left to stand. "Do you think about it?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her jaw tightened. She didn't look away. "Every day." The admission hung there, raw and impossible. She broke eye contact first, her hand moving to the papers as if they could anchor her. Her fingers trembled just enough for me to notice. I wanted to reach across, to steady her hand, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed frozen, the weight of her words echoing louder than any touch could have. We didn't move, didn't speak. The clock ticked on the wall. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle. Every sound seemed to underline how nothing about this moment could be undone. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, but loud enough for me to hear, "I don't know whether I'm more afraid of starting this or of stopping." The next morning, she wasn't in the office. Her chair sat empty, the desk too neat, like she'd wiped every trace of herself away. I told myself not to notice, not to care, but every time the phone rang or the door opened, I caught myself looking up too fast. She came in late. No apology, just a nod, slipping past me with her bag pressed against her side. She looked different. Not careless, not undone, but something softer in her face, a weight pressing just beneath her skin. "Inventory forms are on the desk," she said, brisk. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but the wall in her tone warned me off. Hours passed. I buried myself in work. Then, when I went back to grab a wrench from the office, I found her sitting in the half-dark, staring at her phone. She didn't notice me at first. The screen glowed in her hand, frozen on a voicemail notification. The kind you can't bring yourself to delete. "Everything okay?" I asked. Her head jerked up. For a moment, her eyes were glassy, unfocused. Then she slipped the phone face down on the desk. "Fine." But her voice wasn't fine. I hesitated. "You don't look fine." That earned me a long silence, heavy and unblinking. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, like she had to hold herself together. Then, finally, she said, "You remind me of someone." The words settled into me like a weight. "Someone?" I asked. She nodded, eyes fixed on the corner of the desk. "My brother's apprentice. Years ago. He was reckless, brilliant, always running headfirst into things." She paused, her throat tightening. "He didn't make it past 25. Her voice was steady, but her hand gripped the armrest until her knuckles paled. I stood there, useless, trying to breathe through the sudden ache in the room. "I shouldn't have kept you late," she said, almost to herself. "It's not fair." I wanted to step closer, to tell her I wasn't him, that I wasn't going anywhere. But I knew how that would sound. Too eager, too selfish. So instead, I lowered myself into the chair opposite hers. "I'm not running headfirst into anything," I said quietly. Not unless you push me. Her eyes flicked to mine then, sharp, searching. Something softened there, something she didn't want me to see. She let out a faint laugh, brittle around the edges. You talk like you know more than you should. Maybe I do, I said. My voice felt steadier than my chest. The silence stretched again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the ghost of the man she'd lost, the echo of something she didn't want to feel again, and the pull of something she couldn't entirely push away. Her phone buzzed once more. She ignored it. And then, softer than the storm we'd survived 2 nights ago, she said, "You don't know how dangerous it is for me to keep seeing you here." It happened without planning, without pretense. Just another evening where the shop emptied out and we lingered longer than we should have. She was sitting on the edge of the desk, papers forgotten, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. I stood near the window, watching the faint drizzle blur the parking lot lights into hazy gold smears. The silence between us wasn't sharp anymore. It was tired, heavy, waiting. Finally, she spoke, her voice almost lost under the hum of the air vent. "You deserve someone who hasn't already lived too many lives." I turned to her. She wasn't looking at me, but at her own hands, fingers worrying the silver ring she always wore. "Maybe I don't want someone else," I said. The words felt reckless and steady all at once. Her laugh was small, almost a sigh. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," I answered, softer this time. She looked up then, and the weight of her gaze nearly undid me. It wasn't longing, not exactly. It was surrender. The kind that comes when someone's been fighting too long against something they can't hold back. "I can't," she began, but her voice broke halfway through. She pressed her lips together, shook her head. "I can't stop this from mattering." That was the first time either of us admitted it aloud. Not love, not desire, but matter. The word hung in the room like a fragile truth. I crossed the distance slowly, each step deliberate, giving her every chance to look away. She didn't. When I reached her, I didn't touch her right away. I just stood close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, close enough to hear the uneven rhythm of her breathing. Her hand shifted in her lap, almost unconsciously. I let mine fall beside it. For a long moment, nothing. Then, barely, her fingers brushed mine. It wasn't a grasp, not even a hold, just the quiet acknowledgement of presence. But it was enough to undo the weeks of silence, the guarded words, the locked doors. We sat there like that, no confessions, no promises. Just the storm inside us quieting into something steady, something unbearably simple. Her head dipped, just slightly, and I felt the faintest weight of her forehead lean against my shoulder. No words followed. None were needed. The clock ticked softly in the background. Outside, the drizzle stopped. Inside, the world narrowed to the warmth of her leaning against me and the silence we finally didn't have to break. And in that stillness, I knew nothing about this was fair or right or easy. But it was ours. Looking back now, I think about the quiet more than anything else. Not the tension, not the storm, not even the sound of that lock clicking shut the first time I walked into her office. What lingers is the silence we finally allowed ourselves, the kind that didn't demand answers, only presence. People like to imagine love as fireworks, as declarations, as the moment everything changes. But with her, it wasn't like that. It was slower, messier, built on hesitation, on pauses, on the unspoken weight of two people who knew too well the risks of letting themselves be seen. She taught me that closeness doesn't always come from what's said. Sometimes it's the hand that doesn't quite let go, the laugh that slips out when it isn't supposed to, the forehead resting quietly against a shoulder. Small things that carve themselves deeper than grand gestures ever could. And me? I learned patience. I learned that wanting someone isn't the same as needing to claim them. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is sit in the quiet and let it matter, even if it terrifies you. She once told me she was afraid of starting, and even more afraid of stopping. I didn't understand it then. Now I think I do. Starting meant facing the possibility of loss again. Stopping meant admitting that what we had already was something worth losing. Both choices carried a cost. I don't know if what we share will last forever. That's not the point. The point is that it changed us, both of us. She let herself be vulnerable in a way she hadn't in years, and I grew into someone who could sit with the weight of that without running from it. Sometimes, when the shop is loud, when tools clatter and phones ring, I catch her glance across the room. Just a flicker, a thread of connection no one else would notice. And in that second, I feel it again. The spark, the pull, the quiet collapse into something real. That's what love looks like when it's stripped down. Not fireworks, not fairy tales. Just two people finding enough courage to sit together in the silence and let it mean something. And maybe that's worth more than anything else. So tell me, have you ever had a moment like that? One you couldn't explain, one that changed you, even if no one else would ever understand why?